Hey everybody, it's Rory from A&S Gear, and today we're going to learn how to do some general maintenance on your paintball markers. Okay, we're looking at a Stryker MP2 Elite. So this is one of four. There are four guns which use the same body and they have different accessories on the outside of them. So this is the MP2 or the Elite MP2. So there's a lesser accessoried version of this, and there's also the M4 style or the M16 style ones. But the body style is going to be the same, or the body set's going to be the same. It's just the parts that are on the outside. So we'll take this apart and we'll look at the inside here. And we'll do a brief little look inside the loader because really this is more of a maintenance video for your gun than it is for your loader. But seeing as though they do all come in a kit, they all come together, then we'll look at it. So let's get the stuff off the gun that we really don't need right now though, so we can clear some space. The whole barrel is just going to screw right off. If you need to do barrel maintenance, just swab it out. It's pretty simple for barrels. It's the most threading ever. Let's get that over there. We're going to take off this rear sight. Just a couple turns will loosen it up and you can actually just slide it right off. Feed neck has a little button right here, and we're going to slide it forward. You can see that there's a notch cut right here that will allow us to slide the feed neck forward and then pop the feed neck off like that, so that you can drop it into that slot and then slide it back. I guess you could slide it all the way off the front too, but if you had your barrel and accessories on the front right here, the feed neck would not come all the way off. It would get caught up on whatever was up here. So this notch is there so that you can set it in there and then slide it over. We don't need that. And that's it, as far as what we can take apart from the outside of the gun right here. So let's set it aside and just take a real brief look at your loader. Maintenance on your loader is really just going to be cleaning. So make sure that there are no paintballs in it so that you can clean it. Flip the lid up. I mean, I guess you don't necessarily need to flip the lid up. You want to push this button down and slide the top off, the whole section. But I find it easier to lift the lid up, get a hold of the top of the loader, push the button in, and then kind of pry it up. And the button needs to go pretty far down in there to get it off of there. So that'll come off. You can clean the top or the inside of that, wipe it down. The bottom section, you just grab the tray and pull it out like that. And that gets you to your bottom section where you can put your batteries in, change your batteries, wipe out your tray down in here, clean this all up. Hopefully you don't have any paint underneath there. In these sections up here, that would be bad, just because it's a pain to clean. But you might have some in the bottom right here, so just wipe that out. Now, if you need to get more into it and actually clean out where your eyes sit, you can see your eye wires are in here. These, the red and orange, I think is what it is. Yeah, red and orange. And the other one is the blue and the black right there. Those are your eye wires, because you have two sensors down inside of here, where right in there. It reads the paintball coming through like a brake beam system. Then you will need to undo all these screws and lift this whole tray out. But if you are careful and you're not using terrible paint, you really shouldn't run into that problem. Could happen. So put it all back together. Snap everything into place. Nose on. The nose goes forward like that. Not around, but forward. Snap it together. Done. Very, very simple loader setup right there. Get it out of the way. All right, the meat and potatoes part. There's a bunch of stuff you need to take off of this gun to kind of get to it. The body comes in a couple different pieces. This comes off in a certain way. The stock comes off once you get the bodies apart. We are going to take the two grip screws off here. And the reason we're going to do that is to make sure that our battery is disconnected, and it gives us access to where the battery wire is going to want to slide up through. So let's just set those off to the side. Now we're going to have a lot of screws and a lot of parts. We're going to try to keep everything grouped together as best as we can. All right, so first thing we're going to do is the bodies, or the body screws. So let's take this one off here. And this is actually split into two pieces. you have this rear section which is split right here, and then the front section split up at the front. When you undo this rear section here, it will not come apart. So don't expect to take these 2 screws out the back like this, loosen them up, and then be able to lift this back piece out. You can't. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you might be able to force it, I guess, to do that, but I would not recommend it. So let's get these out then. And there's 4 of these. And then actually, even when we take this top part off, this front section off, we still can't remove that part. There's another screw underneath there that holds it together. So what I'm trying to say is, once you've done a couple screws, don't just try to yank things apart. Not helpful. All right, so we can get this off now. Lift that up. And my 4 screws are still in there. I'm just going to set it off to the side. Should be able to pull this back piece off now, just like that. Put those over there. Now we can get to this part. You see there's 1 extra screw right here, which we need to undo. We can lift up that piece, set it over here, because these screws go in here. And then you can see how our stock is attached to this rear section right there. So we'll put our stock and that section all together over there, so we don't lose any of that. Now for this part, if you truly want to disassemble this and take this section completely out, you do need to disassemble the regulator on the bottom, slightly at the beginning. So to do that, we are first going to remove our 2 frame screws that are underneath here. So this is attaching the frame, and this front grip is part of the frame, to the, I'm going to call this the actual body. This is the inner body right here, or the bolt housing, bolt body housing. I'm sure there's a more scientific or appropriate name for it, but I don't know what it is. So we've got those 2 screws. 1 and 2 out there. Now what we're going to do is we are going to take this off, and there's a snap ring that's on here. We're going to undo that one, and we'll be able to slide the swivel and the ASA off. Once these are disconnected, then we can slide the body and the regulator up out of the top. So we'll do these ones here. Woo! And this one. Yikes. It doesn't want to stay in there today. So that's loose now. Now to get this ring off of here, you could use a pair of like needle nose or something like these, but you actually have to spread them apart to get it to work, which is going to be a pain. So we actually have a special tool for that, and we'll go ahead and grab that and take it off of there. So this is like a snap ring or retaining ring plier. You can reverse it so that when you push it this way or when you squeeze it together, it spreads apart. And if you undo this one and switch it to the other hole, when you squeeze it together, it closes. So depending on the type of snap ring or retainer ring that you're using or trying to take apart, either one that needs to spread apart or one that needs to clamp down, this is adjustable for both. So we are going to stick it, there's 2 of those holes right there. We're going to put that in there. We're going to open it up, and we're going to lift it off. Like that. Now that makes it incredibly easy to have the right tool. To use the wrong tool, which you'll see in a minute, can be quite difficult sometimes. So that'll slide off of there now. I don't want to lose these or get them mixed up with anything else. So we'll put that there. Now this will let us take our frame and just slide it right out. We've already got our grips done so that we can just make sure that our battery wire comes right out. And that's done. If you have paint or anything on this, you can clean it up. If you need to get inside here a little bit more, you could take your trigger out. We really don't ever need to do that. because the trigger just pushes against the micro switch inside of here. So there's no electronic connection between the two. You have your, what am I trying to say? Power button, that's what it is. On the board, your power button is actually right there. That just gets pushed like that. And this little button on the side is what you're pushing against when you're pushing on that button right there. It's a very simple design as far as a internal system goes. And when we actually get into this part, you'll be like, hey, I think I've seen that before, because it's very similar to another gun that's out there. They are not the same, but they are very similar. At this point, we're going to do two breakdowns. We're going to do a regulator breakdown. We're going to pull this apart and show you the insides of it. And then we're going to take the bolt assembly out and show you the insides of that. So to get the bolt or the regulator off the body, there is one screw that is on the top right here. You undo this one, and it will drop the regulator off of the body. Just like that. Where'd it go? Oh, didn't fall out. There it is. I'm going to move this up here because these two screws that are up here are for my frame, so I don't want to get them separated. Now at this point right here, our hose is coming in to our regulator. So to get it off, it's just like a macro line setup. We're going to take this blue collar and we're going to push it down. We're going to compress it down that way, and then that will let our hose slide right out. Just the same as a macro fitting, just a little bit smaller. And then we can disassemble our regulator. Now the top section of the regulator really doesn't have anything in it. It does have a bleed valve, so if the regulator is overpressurizing, it'll bleed out of here, and it just has our connection to go to our solenoid. So there's nothing for maintenance inside of this that you shouldn't really need to do. This though is your the major part of your regulator. So it's got a piston, some what's called a Belleville washer stack, which we'll take apart and you'll need to see because it's important. Another washer, something that looks kind of like a top hat, and then our piston and our adjustment screw. So to get all of that out, there's another retainer ring that looks just like this one, but it's smaller and it's on the inside. And unlike this one where we needed to spread it apart to get it off, the one on the inside we needed to squeeze together to get it out. Now downstairs at my bench, I do have a smaller version of this, but I don't have it upstairs with me. So I'm going to use just a pair of needle nose pliers like this, and I'm going to try to get this out. Now sometimes they don't like to come out, and you can just kind of grab them and get them out. But we want to kind of get it up as high as we can before we really start grabbing it and trying to muscle it out of there rather than doing it properly. So let me see if I can kind of get a better grip on this thing and get it out before I get angry at it. Ooh, there it goes. I got it. See, you can see they're pretty much the same looking thing right there. But for this one, it needs to go together like that rather than spread apart to come out the outside of something. So we'll set that off to the side. One thing that you will need to remember when you are disassembling your regulator, especially if you don't have a way to chrono your gun, if you were at the field and you knew your gun worked the way it was set up, you want to make sure that you put it back that way. So the way that you know where to reassemble your regulator so that your velocity stays the same, or roughly the same, when this is in, before you take this piece out, you're going to take your Allen key and drop it into your reg adjustment screw, and you're going to back your screw out till it butts up against this retainer. And you're going to count how many revolutions that needs to be. So I know for this one, it's about 3/4 of a revolution. So when I completely remove it all out, and we go back to put it back together, I'm going to completely bottom the screw out against the retainer, and then I'm going to go in 3/4 of a revolution, and that should put my regulator back to the point where it gives me the velocity that I had before. Now, it's not an exact science with that. You do need to go chronograph your gun again just to make sure. So when you get to the field, the next time you play, make sure you reset it because it might not be exactly the same. But it should be close enough to make your gun work and function at a at a place where you can make sure everything is right. So we've got that out, 3/4 of a turn, but now we're going to take it completely out. So there's our adjustment screw. We're going to line them up kind of how they go together. This is our piston, spring. You're going to need a pick for this stuff down here. For people who aren't comfortable with doing this, actually I probably would recommend using an Allen key to do this. Because the pick does have a pointed end, it is possible to damage the O-ring that's in there if you aren't careful. So use something that's a little bit more blunt to push out the piston, like that. And then you will need a pick to get the rest of the stuff out. So the little hat that I was talking about earlier, it looks like a little top hat, and then an O-ring. And that's everything that's inside of here. So at this point, we would clean it all. We would make sure that the 2 O-rings that are here, which go for our swivel, so our swivel can rotate around, make sure that they're good, they're lubricated and not broken in any way. And then we would go through all of these. We have an O-ring on our piston right here that we want to make sure is clean and not damaged. Smaller one that the piston is going to ride through, and then the one on the adjustment piston down here. Now there's a couple things that you can, well, one thing you can disassemble slightly further, and you want to make sure that if you do disassemble it, that it goes back into the right orientation. So let's go ahead and take that apart. All right, so this is our reg seat right here, this black puck kind of looking thing. And when these 2 pieces come together, they butt up against each other, and that's what controls your, or cuts your airflow in through your regulator so that you get the appropriate pressure. The seat can come out. If it ever gets damaged on the top, you can actually take it out and you can flip it over. And the opposite side basically has a whole new face to it. So you can just flip it over and reuse it. Underneath, though, is it's a little cup. I'm going to just call it a little cup. And there's a spring that sits underneath it. So I'm going to try to let you guys see this, if possible. You can see that, get in focus there, that this part has a cup shape to it. It's open, or not open, it has like a concave feature to it. And the back side is completely flat on the other side. You need to make sure that the cup side, or the scooped side, is facing up against the bottom of the reg seat when you put it together. If you don't, it will not regulate properly and it won't work. So your regulator won't regulate. So we've got to make sure that when we put that together, that it looks like that with the cup facing up against the reg seat. We can just go ahead and push the reg seat in when it's properly put together. So this looks like, when it's installed, this at the bottom, this against it, the spring right there, this hat goes inside the spring, like that. This O-ring sits underneath it. Obviously it's going to be on its side. And then this thing goes through from one side to the other. So this O-ring rides around that. This hat sits on top of it, the spring, that, and that against it, and that behind it, just like that. Now what's important about these down here is how they sit. If you're wondering, well, I see the spring for this section to control the piston, but where's the spring to control the large actual, well, I shouldn't say the piston, the adjuster, and then the actual piston at the bottom? Well, these shims, they look like, are actually, they're not flat. They are rounded. And when you stack them together on top of each other, they create a spring. Now this spring is crazy hard to compress by hand, but air pressure will do it. It'll compress it down, and this will act like a spring, and it will go in and out. Now if you put this together wrong, you can create no spring inside of there. So there's 7 pieces in here, and they all need to go opposite of each other all the way up. And if you see, if I put them together improperly, if I just stacked them all on top of each other, you'd see that they would just all be flattened out together, and they would not do anything on the inside of the gun. They would not create the appropriate spring length and ability to compress and bounce back that we were looking for. So we need to alternate, flip-flop them all the way out. And now we've created an actual spring inside of there. So that spring is going to go on there. We're going to reassemble everything. All right, so let's put it back together. Now there's very specific steps to putting this back together. If you don't follow the steps properly, things won't stay in place, and when you try to slide something through, everything just falls apart again. So the first thing we are going to do is we're going to put our O-ring in. We're going to drop the O-ring down, and you're not going to be able to see it on the camera, but down inside there is actually a little groove where this O-ring will sit in. Now that groove will not hold the O-ring in place from falling out or coming back through. If I was to turn this over, it might fall out, but it just does give it a spot to sit properly. Now we want to take this hat and put it back in there. The flat side, so that side right there, sits against the O-ring. So when we put this in, we want to make sure that it stays that way, that it doesn't flip over or spin around as it drops down in there. So we're going to take it and we're going to put it on either a pick, we could put it on an Allen key or something, and we can put it down in there and make sure that it stays, it's stuck right there, there we go, that it stays in the right spot, that it doesn't have a chance to rotate and flip over. Then you can always kind of push on it once it's down in there and make sure that it's in its right spot down inside there. All right, next is we're going to put the piston through the bottom. Now if we just push this piston up and through, when this part hits the O-ring, it's going to move the O-ring and move it out of place, and it will not stay in its right spot. So we need to hold that hat down on top of that O-ring so that nothing moves. So I'm going to take my my Allen key and I'm going to push it down in there. So I'm pushing on the side of the hat. I'm not pushing on the top of it because this needs to slide through it. Put that in there. And then I'm going to push it up through. Now I'm actually looking down in the top and I'm trying to line the tip of the piston up with the hole so that I can then push it through. And it should look like that if you can see it in there. The piston is coming up through, you can see my finger behind there, up through the O-ring, through the hat, and they're all still sitting in the same spot. At this point we can reattach the upper section of the regulator. So now that piston cannot slide down and all those shims, or I shouldn't call them shims, the Belleville washers can fall out. We don't want that. So now that traps this section so it can't go anywhere. Now we're going to put our spring in. So the spring is going to drop down and go around the hat down in there. Then our adjuster drops in with the reg seat facing towards the spring. Then our adjuster goes in. I'm going to screw that down so that we have enough space to get our snap ring back in. Not that one. So you're going to compress it down beforehand. You're going to slide it in, and then when it's in the groove, you're going to let go of it. And then you're going to look down in there to make sure that it is properly in its groove, that it's not sitting up higher than it should be. If it is sitting up higher, you can just take your plier and push it down, and it will snap down into place. All right, now remember how far we need to turn it? It was 3/4 of a turn. So we're going to back it all the way up till it stops. Remember, we don't want to force it, just back it up till we feel it hit that retainer, and then we're going to go 3/4 of a turn, and that should put us at our original velocity. If you can't remember that while you're working on the gun, write it down somewhere. It'll make it easier. All right. So on to the body. The solenoid, you're not going to be taking it apart, so don't worry about it. Typically, any leaks that I've seen with these guns have come from the bolt assembly. I guess there's a rare occasion that your solenoid could leak. If it does, they aren't really rebuildable, so you'll need to contact Tippmann to get a replacement or fixes for that. But a couple other things we can look at right here. We're going to look at your eyes. We're going to take the bolt out and show you what needs to be looked at and maintained on that as well. All right, so let's take our eyes off. I'm just going to take one side off just so you guys can see what it looks like. You can just unscrew that. There's usually a little piece of foam right here, and that's what this this white piece is right here. It's just a little foam piece, and that helps just keep the screw from accidentally falling out. So you can drop that, you can do whatever you want with it, and the screw will stay in place. So what you want to check underneath your eyes, obviously, is your detent. So that's this piece. There's one on both sides, right there. It's just a little rubber nub, and it works as a retainer for the ball. So when the ball drops inside here, you've got one of these on each side, and the ball will have to be forced past it. But since it's rubber, it won't break the paintball when the paintball slides by it. So there's one here, and there's one on the other side as well. And they just act as two little fingers to help keep one ball in the gun at a time, so you don't double feed or chop. And then your eye wire and eye bulb right here. It's easy to lift out. You can see I just kind of took a little pick and peeled it out of there. You want to wipe it off. Take a Q-tip, wipe it off there, paper towel, little soft cloth, whatever it happens to be. You don't have to baby these things. They are pretty robust, but don't bend it, don't crimp it, don't do anything like that. It's set up as it needs to be in the proper shape and form. Just clean it. Take that out, clean it. If it's dirty on the inside here, run a Q-tip through there, clean it out. This really controls the rate of fire of the gun. This is what's detecting paintballs inside of here. So if this is dirty or it can't see properly or it's not functioning properly, you can break paint, chop paint, suffer rate of fire. All sorts of problems can come from eyes being dirty. So take your eyes out, clean it. Make sure you clean the body inside of here where the eye goes through. I see all sorts of people, they pull this out, they clean it, and then they just jam it right back into a ton of paint. So make sure you clean the whole thing rather than just part of it. Once you've got that all cleaned up, you're just going to set this back on and screw it down. Now you can see this eye just keeps wanting to pop out. It doesn't want to stay in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give the wire a little bend down. I'm not crimping it. I'm not excessively torquing it or anything. I just want it to stay in its position right there. So that's that. Then we're going to put that back on top. And there we go. Screw it down. When we screw it down, make sure we're not pinching our eye wires against the body over here. Make sure they do run down and out the bottom of the eye cover. You do that on both sides right there. Now, as far as work to do on the inside of the gun from here, there are two O-rings on the front side. Let me pull this apart real quick and I'll show you. You just unscrew the bolt cap. You can do it by hand like I did, and you can also put an Allen key into the back and do it that way if you like. It's up to you. Now, if any of you are familiar with other guns, this probably looks very familiar to you. We'll talk about that in a minute, but inside here, let's see if you can see in there. You might be able to. So there's one O-ring that's back here. It's on the back side of the breech right here, and it's a green O-ring. And then there is one up at the front. You can kind of see it right there. There's a white O-ring up there. And these help seal the breech when the bolt comes forward, because the bolt's sitting like this. When the bolt comes forward and air escapes out, these two O-rings seal the bolt so that all the air that it's escaping out goes through the bolt and out the end of the gun, and not around or anywhere else where you'd be losing air and losing efficiency on there. So these two O-rings, not necessarily super important for gun or cycling, but definitely important for performance. And also it helps seal the bolt going backwards. So this front or this back O-ring right here helps seal around this when it's in here. You can see that it does just clear that O-ring so it is sealing right here. And it's just helping, I don't want to get too technical. It's just helping create a good seal for when the gun is shooting. We'll leave it at that. Now the back of the bolt, or the engine section, I guess, really is two pieces right here. And there's multiple O-rings around the whole thing. So you've got your sail O-ring, your bumper O-ring. This front O-ring is just a bumper it, so that when the bolt comes forward, it hits a stop point right there, and it hits that O-ring. It's a very, very hard O-ring. It just works as a shock absorber, basically, for when the bolt comes forward. This O-ring, if this goes bad, you'll get leaks down the breech. If this O-ring on the inside right here goes bad, it's kind of hard to see. Right there, you can get leaks down the breech as well. So check those O-rings. This O-ring, this front white one, you'll probably never replace. This middle one you should be checking, or this on the bolt, I should say, the middle one you should be checking, because it's very important. And these back two O-rings you should check as well. They just slide inside of there. O-rings on this back can, you've got this outside one. This O-ring here, this one here, they're all the same. Same size, same everything. They just seal this part of the can against the outside of the body so air can't escape. When air is coming in here, it can't get around this and flow out the end of the gun. If you get a leak that is coming not through the barrel, but around the barrel or the bolt, check these O-rings on the backside here as well. Or this particular one right here, that one, to see if that's causing the problem or not. And that's it. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 being on the inside, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 O-rings on the bolt, and this front one is really not a non-O-ring. It is an O-ring or a seal, but it does not really do anything besides create a buffer right there, a bumper. So check all those, keep them lubricated. You can see the amount of grease that's on here right now. That's a good amount. If you've got just like caked on grease, then you're just overdoing it. And too much grease will actually cause the bolt to not want to slide around. It'll actually make it stick. So don't overdo it. Once you've cleaned off your O-ring of grease, put some on your finger, roll it around on your finger, and be done. You don't need to get crazy with it. I see so many guns that are over-greased. It's just not helpful. You're actually hurting yourself by doing that. Or not yourself. You're hurting the performance of your gun by doing that. All right, so we can get back to, or get down to putting it back together, I guess. So from here, we're gonna start reassembling it. Now, I'm gonna try to do it in the reverse order of how I took it apart, but it's a lot of parts, so we'll just kind of throw it back together and see how it comes along. All right, so I am gonna start by putting my regulator back together. So I'm gonna take my hose, and then all you just need to do is push it in, and it connects. We don't need to do anything else. Line up the top. Put that screw in there. Now normally, when I would start putting something back together, I would have cleaned my hands off. They're a little bit greasy right now and slippery. So if I start dropping things, you'll know why. So that's back together, and that's tight on there. Kind of holds everything in the right spot. We can go ahead and slide this through. Now the first thing we want to do is make sure that our regulator is going into its proper spot. And then our battery wire goes through there, so we can slide that down. Before we get it all the way down though, make sure we pull that through. If we just push it down, we're going to catch that wire on the edge here, and we're probably going to break it. So let's push that down. And from right here, we can go ahead and just put our 2 frame screws back in. That way the body doesn't keep slipping out of the frame. And I always kind of hand tighten as I put the screw in, and then I'll go back and give it a little turn. A little bit more, but never overdo it. So that's back together on the bottom side. Now we can do this one of 2 ways. I know that I left this pretty much for the last part before I separated it out, but at this point we can put it on now if we wanted to, or we could assemble the top and put this on last. It really doesn't matter at this point. I'm going to put it on now. I'm going to drop that down, get this piece here, I'm going to use my snap ring tool. I'm going to spread that apart and set that in place. And again, if it doesn't fit into its groove, you just push on it, it should drop right in. And then we're going to line up these screws. And typically I do the front one first, because sometimes, if you look at this right now, it might be hard to see if I do it this way. You can see that it isn't flush against the bottom. And that's just because of the way that the line setup is. It doesn't want to let it bend in the proper way. So if you just try to put this rear one in right now, when the ASA is kind of lifted up, you might cross thread the screw into the nut that's on the inside here. The front one is flatter than the other one is. It's closer to the body. So we can start with the front one and we'll have less of a possibility of cross threading. And when that one tightens down, it'll then bring this bottom one flush up against there. So you can see only the bottom or the front one's tight. And now we can tighten this back one down and not really run any possibility of cross threading. If you're weary of that, always back up the screw first before putting it in and make sure that the threads start in the right spot. Tighten, tighten, done. All right, so our bottom section is assembled right now. We can kind of go ahead and start with the body cover, I guess is what you're going to call it. So we've got our back side first. There. Our front side, it's going to go over it, but we do need to put our stock on. So our stock is just going to fit into these two grooves that are right here. And there is a indexing stop point on it. So if you look along the top of the stock right here, there's a mark or a piece of plastic right there. And that needs to be facing directly up. So that's going to be in the vertical. So when the two pieces of the sandwich come together, this can't rotate on the inside. So put that on there, put our stock on there. And then we can take our other side and put it on there. And then from there, that's the wrong size. Tighten down this front one. I'll keep that together. And remember, we have these two from the back side. And we can tighten these ones on too. All right. Tight. A little bit of extra. All right. Now we can go ahead and put the front on. So like that. Now I'm going to look at the back side to kind of make sure everything's lined up and together. I can flip it over. Do the same thing. And as I've said in a lot of these other videos, if it doesn't line up, doesn't easily snap together, don't force it. Start over. It's not that big a deal. Couple extra minutes, an extra 5 minutes of you taking it back apart and redoing it is much better than, I don't know how much it would be to replace this body by cracking it or snapping it in half. So it's always worth it. All right, the last thing would be to take our battery, reconnect it. Oops, slippery. Tuck it nicely inside there. And then put these back in. After this, we could put our sight back on, which we'll do. We'll put our feed neck back on, our barrel back on, but we'll leave the hopper off. We don't really need that on there. That. And again, we'll use that little slot right there. And we need to look at the other side to make sure that we're lining the feed necks up with the proper hole area. So that goes in there. And And there we go. Stryker MR2 Elite back together, ready to go. Well guys, I hope this helps you out with any questions or concerns you have about your paintball gear or products. And as always, for all your paintball needs, shop ansgear.com.